Hi everyone, welcome to the Black People. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And I'm Chetawanze.
All right, so Chita, what are we doing?
Well, we are changing the name of this podcast. We found that there were like four different, we had originally agreed, but as I was saying, only for us to find out like there were like four different people who already had, as I was saying, on places like Spotify, Apple Music. So we decided to change it. And it was a good play on words, the black paper, because of last week's white paper.
Yeah,
So that was unique. So we've gone with the black paper. So going forward, this podcast is going to be called the black paper.
and the good thing about the Black People is it also just really lays out our thoughts. They're not conclusive, as it were. We invite you to share your thinking, ask questions, let us know how you would like to improve things. So just like a government white paper would lay out the intentions of a government, the Black paper lays out our thoughts, and we want to collaborate with you to make them work for the community. So, having said that, Cheta, do you want to tell the listeners what we're speaking about this week?
Basically, we're speaking about mental health. There's a story that caught our attention in the UK papers about a former police chief who committed suicide. God rest his soul. Jevon Allen, a respected fire chief, not police chief, took his own life because of a campaign of harassment over his qualifications.
That would be Wayne Brown.
Wayne Brown.
Yeah.
I read up on Jevon Allen. I think it's yeah, I think it's important to I think maybe at this point I'm a bit jet lagged. I've been traveling. I'm
Mhm.
currently in the United States and I've been traveling across time zones because of work over the last few days. So forgive me if Quick had a hard time holding me down. But he eventually got me down. I just got in from a meeting. It's sunny where I am. It's very dark where he is. It's 3 p.m. where I am. And I'm heading this evening. I'm heading to another airport. It's been intense for the past 1 week.
Yeah, the man of many locations. So yeah, when Brown was the UK's first black fire chief, he worked as a fire chief, and until a campaign of harassment, as it were, began against him because he had, sadly, like many people, forged a detail on his CV. He had claimed he had an MBA.
Forged. My understanding is that he
No, no. So when I say forge, so not FORG, but FUDGED. So it's sort of
okay
like mess about
because
with him. Yeah, yeah.
my understanding is that he was enrolled in an MBA program.
Yes, yes.
And but so he had not quite finished, but he puts so I mean it's something that's back in the days when I used to apply for jobs, for example, when I was doing my first master's, before I got when I started applying for jobs, and in my CV I would write
In
MSc Computer Networks and Internet Security in view. So
yes,
it looks to me like he neglected by omission or commission to put in view
yes,
in his CV and gave the impression that he already had an MBA. And my understanding is that for that particular job, an MBA was a sort of prerequisite.
yes. So when I said, maybe you forgive my accent, but it's FUDGED. So as Chester said, it was the either by omission or commission, but it was found out that he didn't quite have this MBA yet. And what followed was just emails to him, to his employer, and online bullying, a campaign of online bullying, and it eventually led to his taking his life, sadly. And what caught my eye reading this story was his partner, Nicola White, who said, he was the one who would tell people to, to be encouraged to stand firm, and he was sort of like the pillar of strength for other people. But sadly, when he needed that strength on his own, and because he was one of those people who was quite stoic and didn't want people to bother about him or to show any form of weakness, he suffered in silence and ultimately decided to end it, which is sad, but also
The person.
it is depressing. But Cheta, it also points to a pandemic of sorts in the Black society at large, but particularly the African heritage communities, where issues of mental health are, I won't say frowned upon, but they are kept hush and no one talks about these things.
They're swept under the carpet. I mean, it's something that requires talking. So I talking about. So I think I should at this point segue into a story about someone who I grew up with. I wouldn't name him, but he died at the start of the year. I recently so he had also migrated to the UK along with his family. And at some point, it became clear that he just couldn't cope. And this is somebody who was doing very well back in Nigeria. He was doing quite well. Wife, two kids. They left everything behind, moved to the UK, started off well. The unfortunate stories that happened, he couldn't get a job.
Mm.
And the wife was working somewhere, from what I gather. It was nowhere near the level that she was working at in Nigeria. Eventually, the whole thing it put a strain on their marriage, and eventually he just ended it all.
Oh wow.
Now, people who had been interacting with him tell me that he had changed. Now, this is somebody who, when we were growing up, he was the life of the party. He
Mm.
was a very jovial person. And the only reason I'm not saying his name is that I don't have permission to.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but he was a very jovial person. But people who were close to him said that as the longer he stayed in the UK, especially given because one of the things that hooks a lot of people from our side, from there's a lot of what I would like to call expats, is the fact that going back in many cases may not appear to be a viable option
Mm.
for the simple reason that they have left everything behind. Let's put it this way. When my family was moving to the UK, I still like to deceive myself that because I travel a lot, I still maintain a flat in Lagos. So I still like to say that I'm primarily resident in Lagos. But when my family was moving, it cost 18 million naira. Now, 2 years later, a very close friend of mine, his wife got fed up with Nigeria, and of course, the way these things are, it's when your wife gets fed up that you make the move. So his wife got fed up, and they made the move. It cost them 35 million naira. This was about the same kind of visa routes that I used.
Mm.
Now, last year, which was just before Rishi Sunak's new regulations came into place, and then applications dropped precipitously. Another friend of ours made a move, and it cost him 67 million. Now, the difference between
Hang on. This would be the same family situation, like same number of kids.
no, that's what I was about to say. So I have two kids. The chap who came 2 years after me has two kids as well. But the
Mm.
chap who came in last year has three. But even at three, you could
Mm.
extrapolate or do some math and say it would have cost him if he had just two kids, it would have cost him somewhere in the range of 50 to 55 million. I mean, the story that it tells here is the precipitous decline of the naira. For those who don't know, the naira has collapsed in value over the last 3 years, and especially over the last two, after the government sort of let go of it and allowed it to float more freely. It's not a complete float, but it's floated more freely against the dollar, and the value collapsed. And because of that, a lot of Nigerians saw savings wiped out overnight. A lot of Nigerians became poorer overnight, and inflation in Nigeria has been really, really bad. And that is one of the things that made a lot of people decide to get the hell out of the country. So when people have basically put all their savings into this venture, so when you consider that unemployment in Nigeria is very high, many people realize that they're between a rock and a very hard place. Where do they go back? Where do they start from again? But just for context, the chap who moved last year, the one who I said spent about 67 million naira
Mm.
moving, he sold his house. So if they say that things are too rough for them in the UK and they decide to go back, where do they start from?
Starting all over again because now
Yes, starting all over again in his
uh,
40s.
in his 40s. And that's quite interesting because again, a lot of us are people are around me are in their 40s, and you've moved here and you're basically starting to some degree starting all over again. You're trying to understand the culture because the work culture is also different.
Yes.
You're trying to understand the cultural nuances. You're being told at every corner that you don't have a UK experience, even if you've worked for donkey years in Nigeria, and you're just trying to fit in. And to a lot of people, it can be starting all over again. But the problem also is that you have people back home who have outlandish expectations. It's almost like the way they believe it. Once you step foot here, things have changed and suddenly you should be able to solve all their problems with just one transfer. We
It's a
know
black tax by another means.
it's
By
black tax,
another
you know what I mean? And we know that that's not the case. But also, for some weird reason, we like to keep up appearances. We don't tell people the truth, so we're suffering in silence. But also, when you realize that the conversation around mental health is a new thing to a lot of us, not because we've not heard about it now, maybe in through interactions with media from outside the continent, but just because it's never been a thing growing up. I mean, if you were growing up and there were things going on with you, you were either stubborn or possessed, and it was it either had to be beaten out of you or prayed out of you, and suddenly you find yourself in a place where you have to be strong for yourself, you have to be strong for your immediate family, you have to keep up with the Joneses on behalf of those who are back home. And you find yourself in this loop where suddenly, as someone from an African heritage background, you're having a breakdown of sorts, but there's no one to talk to because you either don't even know what to say, or your orientation up until this point has made you believe that mental health, it's either a white thing or is a spiritual attack.
I mean, if we want to be honest, even in this part of the world, they're only beginning to come to terms with how serious mental health issues can be. I think it's after COVID that a lot of people began to seriously talk about mental health as a problem. Before that, I mean, human beings have always had this thing, especially for men, especially for boys. Chin up, be strong. I mean, I will hands up and admit that I tell my son that a lot more than I tell my daughter that he needs to be strong. So it's not something that should surprise. It's just what the way we've been for thousands of years. I think that the field of mental health studies is becoming more and more advanced. People are beginning to understand things more. The question is, how many more suicides, how many more people decide will end it all before we know that this is a very serious thing? And I think a very key thing, begin to encourage people to stop internalizing really serious problems and talk about it. Because I think it all starts from being open, speaking up when you have a problem.
And also, for those not just here but also back home, there also needs to be a more deliberate push by governments on the continent to take this issue seriously. I mean, just a few stats for you. In South Africa, for instance, only 0.28, there are only 0.28 psychiatrists per 100,000 people, versus 12 per 100,000 in the UK. You have in Zimbabwe only 14 psychiatrists in the entire country, and this is as at 2021. Things might have changed, but if you have 14 psychiatrists, that is a huge, underwhelming number. In Ghana, as of 2020, there were 13 psychiatrists for 13 million people. In Uganda, there were 30 psychiatrists, fewer than 30 psychiatrists nationwide as of 2021. In Kenya, there were about as of 2023, there were about 100 psychiatrists for a population of over 50 million people, and in Nigeria, with uh, arguably 200 plus million, we don't know our number, but fewer than 300 psychiatrists for 200 plus million people. So it also just shows you how this is not a seriously it's a serious issue for most African governments. So is it any wonder then that for a
Wait, I would want to interrupt you there, because you are talking of psychiatrists.
yes,
We haven't even, what about the most fundamental thing? Doctor to patient ratio.
well,
So my organization does an annual report on
mm,
Nigeria called the Health Perception Index, where we routinely measure doctor to patient ratios.
mm,
And the doctor to patient ratio in Nigeria, as of the last I checked, is one doctor per 5,000 patients.
my
So you already have a problem in terms of doctors
God.
before we start going to psychiatrists. For context, to be honest, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad around the continent. By far the best is South Africa, which has one doctor for every 1,250 people. roughly the same as Egypt. Egypt is slightly low. I think it's 1,000. It's 1,200 and something of the sorts. Kenya is the same as Nigeria, about a doctor to every 5,000. Ethiopia is a doctor to every 10,000. We have this brain drain. A lot of doctors have been moving, and one of the big travesties, one of the big tragedies that happened in Nigeria during the last government was when a lot of doctors were moving, and the Minister of Health at the time said, "Let them go."
Mm.
After all, his tailor used to be a doctor. That's arrogance that a lot of members of our elites tends to have when when they come under pressure to deliver for the public. So it's a problem, a very major problem. And I think that you have to solve the doctor to patient thing first before we even start talking about doctors, about psychiatrists, because psychiatry is a subset of medicine.
Mm.
I'm going to quote something, a statement that people used to say during the Liberian Civil War, when they will be asked about things, esoteric things like AIDS, esoteric in quotes. So
Mm.
why bother about something that can kill you in 10 years when there are things that can kill you today?
Mm.
So why are we, this is purely from an African point of view, not an African immigrant point of view now. From an African point of view, why bother about mental health issues when malaria is still far and away the biggest killer on the continent?
And that's quite interesting. But the interesting thing is, Africa seems to follow us everywhere. So even though,
Yes.
yeah, even though we can look at these things from the African point of view, it's not too. It doesn't take long for that point of view to then trickle into the UK. Suddenly, it becomes also the African immigrant experience. If we're sticking to the subject of mental health, you ask yourself then, where, if people are not seeking professional help, how are they coping? Where do they seek help? And how does that manifest? And the one thing we see is it manifests in religion. I know I had said it earlier on. Because mental health isn't part of our public health discourse, what we do as Africans is to then seek help in spiritual
Seek help
places,
from God.
seek help from God. The refrain amongst a lot of people is, he has gone mad. Let us pray for him. There's a proliferation of prayer houses. Yeah, and I've just a quick search, will show that in Nigeria there's an estimated 16,000 churches. In Kenya, about 12,000. In Zim,
All you have to do nowadays is to take a drive along Oregon in Lagos. Which
yeah.
Oregon, for those who don't know, it's used to be an industrial estate back in the 1960s. A lot of those industries have gone and they've been replaced by churches. So you have some of the big churches have their headquarters there. I think it's tragic. And this was something that we never quite recovered from the military era because of the hopelessness, especially during the Abacha years, the last 5 years of military dictatorship in Nigeria. And Abacha was a very ruthless dictator. People lost hope. So many people in Nigeria turned to God. Two forms of religion that became very prominent then were the evangelical Christianity and Wahhabi Islam, and they haven't looked back since then. They have the country in a chokehold, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon because we really have not recovered economically.
and that search for God has also, as I said, mentioned earlier, followed us here. So in the London boroughs of Southwark, for instance, there are over 240 black majority churches with more than 20,000 congregants attending service each Sunday. Now, even though generally the number of churchgoers has gone down in the UK, African-led churches have experienced significant growth, and it's quite interesting. I'll give you an example. In Derby, where I am, about 4 years ago, when we moved to Derby, I think there were about two prominent churches for most African heritage communities, but now I think there are over 10. And these places have become places of succor, of finding your place, because the thing is that it's not just about God, it's also about community, it's also about that feeling of home. It's amazing the growth. but I also like to think about how they can now play a huge role because they're quite important in the community. Question is, how can they play a huge role in getting people to think more about their mental health? But before you answer that, Chita, I think let's go for a quick break. When we come back, we can answer that question and then look at a few other topics.
Very good. All right.
Welcome back to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And my name is Chanta.
Right. So before we went on break, Cheta, we spoke about how our search for God in our different countries has followed us to the UK, and how there's now a proliferation of African churches, or what in official language would be called Black majority churches. But how do you think that these institutions can help people, men especially, who seem to suffer in silence, to take their mental health more seriously?
Well, I think there are quite a number of ways that they can help. First things first, I'll raise up my hand and point out that I tend to be very critical when it comes to religion. But at the same time, I understand that religion is here to stay. Religion predates me. Religion will be there after I go. So the way churches can come in is community. One of the problems that I have, especially with the evangelical churches, is that they focus too much on the prosperity gospel. And that in its own way would have the effect of making people in such situations feel left out. It can make them feel very bad as well. And that is problematic. Churches have to become community centers in the true word of community, missionaries. Help their people. So you need proper communities. It's not just the Sunday thing or bring your tithes or come for prayer meetings. It's also to ask, how are you doing professionally? How is your job search going? Okay, if you don't have a job, what can we give you to do so that you will not be idle? Because one of the problems that a lot of people face is idleness. So somebody may not have a job that is paying him what he wants at this point in time, A, but the fact that he has somewhere to go every day and a community to lean on will give him a sense of self-worth. Because a lot of these things could be about self-worth. Secondly, because you have a community, things like racism, the impact will be limited or will be reduced.
Yeah,
One of the things that makes people even more depressed is isolation. When you feel alone, you don't know who to talk to, you don't feel that you have anybody to talk to. So it's important that religious communities, governmental communities, even social clubs, to, as much as possible, try to see the signs of isolation and find ways to break them down, break those things down. Let people talk. I'm a Catholic, and one of the very interesting things that the Catholic Church has is the sacrament of confession, the sacrament of penance, where people go in to talk to the priest, confess their sins, the priest will talk to you, and all of that. It's actually, if you look at it in very absolute terms, it's like seeing a therapist.
mm,
And one thing, most of our people, for cultural reasons, a lot of our people would rather see a priest or a pastor or an imam and talk about their problems with him than
true.
to see a therapist.
I
There's
mean,
still a stigma, and it will take a lot of work to break that stigma. So,
if these faith leaders spoke about the things they heard on a daily, or in a weekly basis, there'll be a lot of problems in many African families.
yes, I agree. I completely agree. But the fact again remains,
Mm.
people get up, they move to a culture that is not exactly welcoming. Forget the claims that they make all the time. It's not the most welcoming, and we can see it in what is happening in the general area. A lot of the code words for immigrants is about race.
Yeah,
That's imagine someone who moves to from a very lively place such as Lagos and then ends up in somewhere in Cumbria where there are not too many Africans and he's isolated. He can easily feel isolated. It's easy to get depressed, especially during the winter.
tell me about it.
Now, imagine such a person who may have been a deputy branch manager in a bank back in Nigeria, and then suddenly he has to be working in an Amazon warehouse. It would begin to cause questions, him to question himself. Have I failed? And as a man, especially from the kind of culture that we come from, that question, have I failed? That's when if people begin to internalize that they have failed, it can lead people to go to very, very dark places.
Definitely. Well, I mean that's true. And at this point, I'd like to shout out to the On Track project. When I was just going through like some research for this podcast, I learned about this project, which is led by Dr. Louisa Kojo and Miss Juni Muhammad. And they both have interest and passion in improving healthcare inequalities, working with black communities. But the even better part is that they do this especially in communities of faith, and they've piloted mental health training for pastors, teaching them how to recognize symptoms and refer people to professionals. So this is good. There are people out there who are helping to spread the word, especially in places where there already is that trust, faith communities, and in places where people already go to have conversations. So whether it's a confession or whether it's just going to seek for prayer from pastors, sometimes I think the best thing is when the leader hears that, and they can then say, "Look, this sounds like it needs some professional help." So shout out to the On Track project for their work in helping faith communities and faith community leaders understand more about the need for mental health conversations.
Well done to them.
Yeah, well done to them. And Cheta, you mentioned, even if just lightly, the conversations are going on right now in the UK. And I don't know if you've picked it up, but it seems there's going to be a U-turn on the winter fuel allowance.
I mean,
Or
that was always going. That was the Winterfield allowance thing was been incredibly unpopular for the Starmer government, and as a result of that, it contributed to really poor showings in the polls.
mm,
One thing that we must understand, that we must accept, is that politicians in this part of the world, and I mean the West, look at things in terms of the elections.
mm,
So one of the reasons, I mean, there's no hiding it, there's no pretending about it. One of the reasons that Starmer published that, released that white paper that he released last week, was simply because of the local elections of 2 weeks previously, and it should be clear to him by now that that did not move the needle. So as a result, they need to find things to basically claw back some of the supporters that they had. So if they are going to go back on the winter fuel allowance removal, then it's clearly backtracking because of popularity stunts. It's what it
so, so,
is.
so
It's
if that can happen, is there any hope at all that there can be some softening of intentions with regards to the immigration white paper? Or is it that we are not seen as a consequential community enough for there to be something of hearts?
I think one of the things that I think that we must come to terms with is that um, there isn't much downside politically to targeting immigrants. There isn't much downside politically. Immigrants are an easy target. Think of how the cost of visa renewals, work permit renewals, the cost to companies for hiring people from outside the UK have gone up, as in have kept going up.
Mm,
So and the reason it's easy for them to hit immigrants repeatedly like that is that there really is no downside. The very ironic and bitter thing in the whole situation is that very many people from our countries would rather not go back home. That is just the fact. A fundamental issue that so many of our people have is the rule of law.
mm,
There's a belief, and unfortunately it has proven correct so many times over the decades. There's a belief that you stand a better chance of justice
mm,
in the Western world than you do at home if you fall foul of the wrong people. So imagine, take as an example, just yesterday in Ibadan in Nigeria, the police
mm.
shot a child.
Yep.
Does anybody think that Policemen who did this would face justice. But
The,
then
the,
you come here and
mm,
you see that they're still having the people, the policemen who murdered, sorry, not policemen, the racists who murdered Stephen Lawrence are facing justice 30 years later. Those little things are very, very instructive. Those little things are incredibly instructive. And people see those things. So it doesn't matter how many times our governments talk about coming back to build a better Nigeria. And this is me speaking as someone who left the UK to move back to Nigeria in 2009. The people, I think I said this last week, and I would say it again. When I did my first master's, there were in my circle, there were 8 of us Nigerians. By 2009, 5 of us had returned to Nigeria, 3 had remained in the UK. Of the 5 of us, only 1 is still left in Nigeria
for now.
for now. So it's one of those vicious cycles where the governments of the host countries know for a fact that our people will always come. One,
And that our people will always pay.
the governments of the host countries know that our people will pay whatever it is they need to pay. They will find the money somehow to come. The governments of the host countries also know that despite all the rhetoric that they make towards to for their people about immigrants and stopping immigration, that their societies need immigrants because of falling birth rates. I mean, I'm sitting in Texas in the United States. This country was built by immigrants. And immigration is part of this country's DNA, regardless of whatever the current president says. So they will always take in immigrants. Things like falling birth rates will mean that they will take in immigrants to keep powering the economy. Because of the way our countries are structured, the very fundamental foundations of our countries, we will remain for the foreseeable future a net exporter of human beings. And I think that's one of history's greatest tragedies.
Mm.
Our part of the world has been a net exporter of human beings for more than 1,000 years now.
And whether directly or indirectly.
For more than 1,000 years. So you have a lot of people always talk about the transatlantic slave trade, but people tend to forget that before that there was the trans-Saharan slave trade, the Arab slave trade. Then during colonial times, a lot of people left. Nigeria, by default, I will always narrow it down to Nigeria. Nigeria has had since 1960 4 great waves of migration. We had the first one between 67 and 70. We had the second one when the economy collapsed in 1979. We had the third one during the end of the Babangida era and during the Abacha era. And now this is the fourth. And the interesting thing is when you look at people like me who returned to Nigeria at a point in time, and or people who return to Nigeria from each of the great waves of migration, and then you compare their average outcomes with the average outcomes of those who stayed in their host countries. The results are in.
Definitely.
The people who stayed in their host countries have had better average outcomes, and
Yeah.
that in itself, people see those things.
And that is
There's a reason why during COVID,
mm.
when the UK essentially flew a jet to Lagos, a lot of Nigerian doctors just basically walked out of their hospitals and climbed that jet and flew over to the UK.
So, Cheta, from your work at SBM, can you say that this is not just Nigeria? Was there? I mean, I know. I guess I suspect I know the answer, especially with the rise of the different communities over the past 2 years here in Derby. But would you say that people also bought this one-way ticket from other countries, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Ghana, and the rest?
Yes, I think it was the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs that published a report that said that about 0.3 to 0.5% of Africa's total population has been migrating every year steadily since 2020. You have Nigeria, for example. Of course, I always look closely at Nigeria. Nigeria was 0.8% of the population. I think the highest was South Sudan, between South Sudan and Somalia or Eritrea. The Horn of Africa, people have been migrating from the Horn of Africa. So you have Eritrea, Somalia, South Sudan, and all of them are more than 2% of their population migrating over the last 5 years. For Eritrea and for Eritrea, it's mostly to Europe,
Yeah.
Germany, Sweden. for Somalia, I think that most of them end up in either the Middle East or North America. For South Sudan, a lot of them end up in the US.
Yeah.
Then Morocco is another one that has, Morocco is a country that is doing well, funny enough. Yet it has migration rates of more than 1.2% of the population. Most
Yeah.
of them ending up in three countries, France, the Netherlands, and Spain. So it's across board around the continent. But a story that is not told often, and it's not told often enough, is the fact that at least a quarter of migrants remain within the African continent. At
Mm.
least a quarter remain within the African continent. Sorry, my apologies, at least three quarters
Mm.
remain within the African continent. So there's a lot of migration from, say, Nigeria to Ghana, Nigeria to Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria to Togo.
And,
So there's a lot of internal migration within the African continent.
and if the African leaders were awake to their responsibilities, would hasten the implementation, not just the signing of this Africa Free Trade Agreement, and just relax these borders. It's madness that we still in 2025 have these borders that make it easier for an African to transact to holiday in Europe than it is to do so in Africa. It's a weird situation to be in.
Again, the fact is we still haven't recovered from colonialism. I absolutely hate blaming colonialism for our problems because it's been 60 years, 65 years in Nigeria's case. We ought to have gotten our acts together. But when you look at the structures, the way your average African country is structured, they're structured to continue having internal tensions. And these internal tensions mean that economic development is behind, is not the prime focus of too many African elites. So when people live a life of relative hopelessness, I mean, think about it this way. In Nigeria, by law, we are meant to pay what 8% of our wages as pensions. So those pensions are deducted every month and paid to PENCOM. And you cannot touch those pensions until you retire, except of course if you lose your job and you can access a
25.
percentage of those pensions after 3 months.
Yeah.
Imagine someone whose pension pot, he can't touch this money, and his total pension pot was, say, 4 million naira in
Mm.
2016. 4 million naira in 2016 was about $10,000.
Mm.
Let's assume that he stopped contributing. So maybe he left Nigeria in 2016. So he stopped contributing to the pension pot. But he still can't touch it until he gets to 65 years old and then he has retired. Then they can start releasing the money to him. So he has 4 million naira sitting in Nigeria in some in the pension fund in Nigeria. I'm making this very, of course, the pension funds are meant to invest the money and all of that, but I'm just making it a very simplistic argument. So in 2016, 4 million naira was $10,000. $10,000 today is about 15 million naira. But what he has is still 4 million naira. So
Yeah.
that pension pot has lost value.
Tremendously.
There's no interest rate that grows that fast. Unless you are selling drugs, there's no legit business that I'm aware of that you will do, well, except tech. But even tech is not it's few people that become unicorns. It's not the norm. It's usually the exception. There are hardly any legitimate businesses you will do that will grow 4 million naira to 15 million naira in in 9 years. So what
This
that means is that his money has lost value,
this turn of events is pressing enough for me to just go seek therapy after this, because
which
we
is the
started from
point. These are the things that contribute to mental health issues. These
yeah.
are the things that
I mean,
contribute to
when,
mental
when,
health
when when
issues.
you really think about it, and people straddle two worlds in one, you're trying to be under the radar here, you're trying to work to just survive here, take care of your family, but then you also have to think of situations back home, trying to take care of things back home. But whatever you've left there is losing value by the day, depending on what country you're from. It's enough to make someone just break down. I see a lot of people. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday. We were talking, and he didn't say anything, but he didn't have to, because I could hear it in his voice. This man is stressed. and there were just those little pauses, and then he'll say, well, it's all right. So it's been something of a depressing episode, but I'll just like to say this. Look, as Africans, we do need to realize that mental health isn't a Western thing; it's a human thing. The strongest of us, the most stoic, the most spiritual, the most hardworking of us, can still fall under the weight of just mental stress, and we need to be comfortable with talking about things like depression, anxiety, grief, PTSD, especially Cheta. There are times.
We need another episode on that because I can assure you, conversations that I have with a lot of Nigerians, and
See,
we are all
Cheta,
suffering from national PTSD.
we know that the police, for the majority of the time anyway, the police here don't carry arms. But I still have that thing when I see a police
Speak for
person.
yourself. Speak for yourself. You are in the United Kingdom. I'm in the United States. I have seen more guns since I've been here for.
So
I've been
how,
here.
how has that
I've been
made you
here
feel?
5 days.
Because there are times I see the police here and I have to remind myself, in a split second, hang on, this is a different country. These are different sets of rules. So we carry around that PTSD, and no one really talks about it, but it's there, and we do need to open up. We do need to seek spaces to heal, to speak, to encourage each other, and to just move, try and open a new chapter. But another important thing is that we need institutions that speak to our community. It would be nice to see more community interest companies, more charities that speak to the African heritage experience.
Very true.
And on that note, except if you have any last note, Cheta, it would be nice to draw a curtain on this episode by encouraging people to please speak out, please speak up, please seek help.
And no thanks to you for changing what we're supposed to talk about Kemi's performance at PM Cubes today. Instead, you brought this up.
Our sister has gone mad again.
All right. Till we see next week.
All right, man. Take care. This has been the Black Paper. We'll see you next time.
Have a nice week.